Hello again. This is the beginning of Lesson 4, the Pharmacology chapter. This is Lesson 4, Part 1, an Introduction to Pharmaceuticals and Dispensing. In this chapter we will be discussing the different classifications of medication and what they are used for, some of the pharmaceutical abbreviations that are appropriate to use when dispensing medications or writing in medical records, being able to read and write prescription labels so that a pet owner can understand the instructions, different routes of administration, which is how medications enter the body, and then being able to calculate weight conversions and determining the amount of pills or liquid to dispense in order to complete a prescription regimen. Pharmacology is the study of medications or pharmaceuticals. Whenever we are handling medications, we need to make sure that we are meticulous, that we aren't making mistakes so that we can avoid overdosages or underdosages, both of which can be equally detrimental to our patients. Whenever we are handling medications, in order to help enable us to be even more meticulous, we have to check the 5 rights every time we touch a medication. The 5 rights are things that you should memorize, and things that you should check, all 5 of these things, every time you touch a prescription bottle or dispense medications for a pet. The 5 rights are: make sure that you have the correct patient, the correct drug, the correct route, that's how it's entering the body, the correct frequency or timing, that's how often it's supposed to be given, and that you have the right dose. Anytime you touch medication, you should check these 5 rights at least 3 times within the prescription filling process. It's a good habit to get into. So make sure that you have these memorized and that you know that you should check them, each one of these 5 rights, at least 3 times every time you're handling medications. Pharmaceuticals typically have 3 different versions of the name. The first one is the chemical name, and this describes the chemicals used in what goes into making this drug. There's 2 examples of chemical names there, and you can follow those down to the next line, which is the generic name or the non-proprietary name. The generic name is usually a shortened version of the chemical name, and it usually describes a specific compound in the medication. There's 2 more examples there. You might have heard of these. The first one is acetaminophen, the second one is carprofen. The third name that a medication can have is called the trade name or the proprietary name. This is a name given to the medication by the manufacturer. So for example, Tylenol and Rimadyl. If you look back up to the generic name, acetaminophen is an abbreviated form of the chemical compound of that ingredient. And if you look down to the trade name, instead of calling it acetaminophen, we call it Tylenol. And again, Tylenol is the proprietary name given by the manufacturer who's producing the medication. We use most commonly the generic name and the trade names when we are in practice, so it's not uncommon for you to be expected to know both. Although for this class you will not have to memorize medication names, simply because almost all animal hospitals have a different range of medications that they use. So the ones that you will be required to memorize will be different once you get into practice, and that will be dependent on where you are practicing. 2 of the agencies that we'll commonly talk about when we are talking about pharmaceuticals are the FDA and the DEA. FDA stands for Food and Drug Administration, and they are responsible for approving new medications for sale on the market, and they also grant exclusive rights to an inventing company so that they can try to recoup some of the cost that went into inventing the medication. Once those rights have expired, then other companies can make generic equivalents, which tend to be less costly to the pet owner. The DEA is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they are responsible for certifying and controlling the dispensing of controlled substances, which are also called scheduled drugs. And they provide licensure for somebody to be able to prescribe controlled substances. Controlled substances are those that have the possibility or the potential for physical or psychological dependence or abuse. There are 5 classes of controlled substances, and they are notated by Roman numerals 1 through 5, Class 1 being the class with the highest potential for abuse. This slide here describes the level of physical or psychological dependency that might be expected with each one of the classes of controlled substances. You can see that Class 1 is has extreme potential for abuse, and there are no current uses for Class 1 controlled substances in the veterinary medical profession. Class 2 through 5, gradually the amount of physical dependency that might be expected is decreased. When you get closer to Class 5, it is less likely that that a patient might become dependent on that. There are also examples of the medications that you might commonly see being used in veterinary medicine provided for each one of these classes, although you will not be required to memorize which drugs are in which controlled substance class. The DEA tells us certain parameters that we need to adhere to when we are handling or storing controlled substances. Controlled substances need to be kept under lock and key. That cabinet is supposed to be locked at all times, although in some practices you might find that they have one person available to unlock it for anybody who might need it in emergency situations. But it is typically locked throughout the day, and only 1 or 2 people typically has access to the controlled substance safe. The controlled substances do require a special license to prescribe and dispense, so the veterinarians are the ones who carry those licenses. A separate log must be kept whenever we dispense controlled substances. In addition to writing in the patient's medical record, we also need to document the dispensing of controlled substances in a separate log, and that log contains information like the name of the medication, how much was dispensed, who it was dispensed to, the reason for dispensing, and then that log also maintains a continuous inventory so that we at any given time can look to see how many pills or how much liquid we have remaining on site of those controlled substances. All documentation pertaining to controlled substances must be kept for a minimum of 2 years.